G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic midweek. Now legends, of course, as always, we have a lot to go over, but before we get into that, I just need to say that if I go off track a little bit today or seem very fatigued, I am. I had an incredibly late night with work and then a very early commitment this morning as well. And my mental stamina under the treatment and the tumour and everything just isn't where it used to be. So if I seem a little bit strung out from lack of sleep and everything else, I apologise, but we will push on. So of course we're going to look at the maps, compare maps, geolocations. I need to clear something up with an aircraft yesterday. We need to look at an ammo dump that has exploded. And then the main meat of this video is going to be looking at the reality of these negotiations. What we know is where Russia is sitting, where Ukraine is sitting is so far apart. And neither of those states can accept what the other one is proposing. And realistically, movement on that is absolutely minimal. And are we going to see that these negotiations by Trump are just going to fall apart? I believe Trump and his team at this point are really thinking that this is much, much more difficult than we thought it was going to be. And we have seen that extension of 24 hours to weeks to months. And what happens if the war just continues on, which is becoming more and more likely? So we'll talk about all of that. But let's start with this ammo dump and plane. Now, yesterday we falsely reported that there is an aircraft flying over Lviv, which was a Saab airborne early warning coordination control aircraft. Now, that was incorrect. It was actually a Ukrainian AN-26, an Antonov aircraft, and this is used for calibration and testing of air navigation systems, especially for ground-based radar and air traffic controlling equipment. We've heard a lot of rumours about the airport in Lviv potentially opening up, but we are still waiting on that Saab AWACS aircraft, and we will see if and when it enters the battlefield. We know that was announced well back in the day when the F-16s were. Of course, there's a lot of systems aboard that aircraft and a lot of trained personnel too. So wait out on that. And the bits we said about the limitations, but also what that aircraft adds, that still holds up. Now, there has been an impressive explosion happen here near Moscow, and this happened at the 51st Arsenal of the GRAU in Vladimir Oblast. Now, this is where there's large ammo depots, dumps of missiles to artillery to all sorts of equipment. Now, the initial reporting was that it was drones, and then it has really swung that no, it wasn't that there was nothing in the air, and it seems like it was a violation of safety requirements while handling explosive materials. Reported that 3 soldiers were killed and 1 civilian was also killed when a shell detonated during unloading. Now, was this just human error and an explosion? You were dealing with incredibly explosive materials surrounded by incredibly explosive materials, or, as some are suggesting, was it some level of intelligence operation? Well, we do not know. Now, the Russian reports, they are saying that only open air storage has been affected, that the bunkers, the closed-in stuff, hasn't been, and that's where the more important munitions are. Russia is infamous for having massive open air storage of weapon systems, as we have seen throughout this war. Now, Ukrainian pages, they always claim when these arsenals are hit or they explode that everything is destroyed, and they take the maximum that is there, say 100,000 tons, and go, all of that is destroyed. But we can't do any battle damage assessment until we either get satellite images, but the real battle damage assessment on something like this is when and if we see impact on Russia's ability to employ weapon systems and munitions. So wait out on that. We'll just have a look at some footage of this so I can put it in the thumbnail, and hopefully that'll be a bit more impressive than my slow reading and killing headache today. But you can see this almighty explosion happening here. That's what you get when you've got then tons and tons of munitions sitting in one area. It's not the first time we've seen one of those go up. Let's have a look at the map. So here is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014. The red check that you are seeing, that is ground that has been occupied during the last 24 hours, or at least according to this map. So the first place we'll come into is Sukhbalka. So this is the eastern Pokrovsk sector, or just to the west of Donetsk. And you can see movement to the north in here. And this is further confirmed by geolocation as well. So I thought I would include this just between where the A and the B is sitting here. What we do see is confirmation of Russian forces in this area, then flying flags also. So confirmation that they are sitting here at this crossroads, and that area has likely come under complete Russian control. Suryak maps, he has an update on this too, that the Russian army captured new positions northwest and northeast of Sukhbalka. In addition, Russian forces began advancing north and east of Kalinove, thus approaching Stara Mykolaiivka. So this is the area Sukhbalka we're talking about, but also he is suggesting that north and northeast of Kalinove towards Stara Mykolaiivka is coming under Russian control as well. So we can see where these two tree lines meet, that he's suggesting right up to about here. Just wait out on that. Remember, that doesn't meet our threshold for confirmation on gains. And then let's just push to the west a little bit, and to the south of Pokrovsk, we can see to the north of Andriivka, this area between Yasnove and Andriivka now filling in. And this is suggesting a gain of about 2.4 kilometers. Now, what I will say is I don't believe this is a gain over the past 24 hours. I think that this is likely still catching up on this front line. As well around Pokrovsk, we can see that there isn't really any shifting here, but that is suggesting there's no shift in the Russian favour as well. We did see trying to capture those flanks moving fairly fast for a number of months from areas like Osheretne after Avdiivka. Now, the next place I want to come up into is then this Seversk, Bilohorivka front line, where we have seen very little changes for a long time, but earlier this week, we did see Deep State confirm an advancement here after Suryak for about a week had been talking about advancements. Now we have this Suryak map here. Now you can already see where this is showing vastly different. See this chalk quarry? This is said chalk quarry because it's showing a lot further out. So you can see this intersection, or not intersection, but the dogleg in the road is right in here. So it's just this sector that he's suggesting is coming under Russian control. Last weekend, Russian army made new advances west of Bilohorivka, along the border of Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, this area in here, we do know there has been some movement in here, and we haven't seen movement in here for some time. And as I always say, the Russian commanders here, they talk about how good the Ukrainian defences are in this sector. So if we start seeing movements in here, I think this tells us a lot about the situation currently on the front line. Now, I just want to come up into Kursk. No changes shown on this map. Sorry, I thought I saw something out the corner of my eye. Now, let's talk about negotiations and reality, and where just both sides are sitting, and where the more I think about this, as I've always said, I remember I was sitting in Kramatorsk when there was multi-launch rocket fire system, multiple launch rocket systems firing, and saying to a guy, I feel like this war is either on the eve of ending or years to go. And I still feel like that. I don't feel like we have some short-term 2, 3, 6 months to go, that it's either right on the eve and very close to an end and sign off and peace deals, or a long time to go. And as this drags on, where you get a better idea of where Zelensky and Europe and where America and then where Russia is sitting, and challenges and advancements on the battlefield, you just think this is so far away. Are we even close? Is the goal just complete exhaustion of the opposing side? But of course, by doing that in attritional war, you will exhaust yourself. What you're trying to do is then increase their exhaustion faster than yours. Remember, a war of attrition is attriting yourself too. You're just trying to attrit more slowly. So let's go over a couple of slides here and some new news, I guess, in this negotiating space, and we'll come to a bit of a conclusion. Now, there is so much information, disinformation and misinformation floating around about negotiations and ceasefires. What I'll say is, unless it is an official announcement that is also then reflected across all three, take it with a grain of salt. And this has been far more difficult than we believe Trump had ever imagined. There is no real solution being presented, or no incentive actually being offered that would actually tempt Russia or Ukraine to come to the table. Remember, the stick isn't working here, so there's going to need to be a carrot, aka incentive. But what incentive is being offered to Ukraine to stop? Also, what incentive is being offered to Russia to stop? Of course, the incentive that you and I will talk about here is, well, less people dying on the front line and better opportunities for the demographic crises that are then occurring and will occur very slowly and then speed up over both Ukraine and Russia. But the incentive to end the war on favourable terms, well, it's just not there. Now, I think it is highly likely that we will see the war continue and US reduce or potentially withdraw support, and that withdrawal support works massively in Putin's favour. What we have heard is the US talking about maybe officially recognising Crimea as Russian. And we've said that even if the US did this, I don't believe this would be enough incentive for Russia to withdraw in other positions and stop the war. And that is, even that which is well below what Russia is requesting, is well outside of what Ukraine or Europe is willing to concede. And we see this. Zelensky has said today that there is nothing to talk about Crimea. It violates our constitution. This is our territory, the territory of the people of Ukraine. And we also see that Kaja Kallas, she has said in response to this recognition of Crimea that then Russia gets exactly what it wants. Crimea is Ukraine, and the EU will never recognise its annexation. And this is the thing, is the US, regardless of how powerful the US is, they can't just unilaterally recognise this. The best they can do is use their leverage over Ukraine. And that leverage is then withdrawing support. And if you don't do this, then we will withdraw support. We don't know the position that Ukraine and Europe is really in to then overtake that support if the US pulls out. Because what I've said is the front line is not stable with current US support. And I don't really care about hard assets. I care more about the soft assets, the intelligence, the picking up of ballistic missiles, all of that being then given to Ukraine. I think that will have more of an effect. And a part that we do forget also is the psychological and morale impact of guys at the front line, that if the US is pulling out, the largest partner and the most powerful country, how does that affect guys who are on the front? But then how does it affect guys that also haven't signed up? That if US is pulling out and you were maybe on the fence about signing up to fight, well, it may push you in the direction of, well, I'm not going to fight. Again, at the end of the day, wars of attrition are societal wars. It's which society can hang on, is willing to give the most. So let's continue on this and through a couple of articles. That Trump said Monday that he would reveal the contents of his proposed peace plan for Ukraine this week, for the war that is occurring, saying I'll be giving a full detail over the next 3 days. But we had very good meetings on Ukraine and Russia. We'll see how that works. So in the next few days, apparently we will see then full detail of what this actually looks like. Of course, he wants to end the war and also has threatened the end of American involvement. Now, in this, a senior American official has said that Ukraine was seemingly willing to give up 20% of its land so long as it was considered de facto recognition of the territory, not de jure. So de facto, this means that we recognise that Russia occupy this land, but we don't say that Ukraine is going to give it up forever. The official said de jure means we acknowledge the Russians have taken this land and will never get it back again. So there may be a willingness to have the border free somewhere, but it's never going to be recognised, as we have seen from Zelensky and Kallas's comments too. The European Union, nor Zelensky, is ever actually going to see that as Russian. And remember, those comments were made about Crimea, an area which has been gone for a very long time and has had votes and the rest. That is way further of an extreme than somewhere like Kherson or Zap, or an area that is not completely occupied either. Now, what's being forgotten in this, though, I think many people forget, there are 3 parties involved here, is that Russia also have to agree to this. So this idea, willing to give up 20% de facto, not de jure, what you're forgetting, though, is that Russia, if you want the guns to fall silent, they also have to agree to this, and that they just won't. They, by their constitution, they have officially annexed this land. They may not occupy all of it, but they see that they have taken that land, that is Russian land. So it's just going to be a political nightmare if then they, we won't recognise this officially. So again, this is the thing I think many people are forgetting. There's actually three parties in this you need to convince. And as I stated in the beginning, it's just so far away, I don't have high hopes. Now, this Financial Times article was titled Vladimir Putin offers to halt Ukraine invasion along the current front line. Now, this article definitely needs some allegedlys in here because, well, a lot of people have pointed to this as misinformation that, look, where was this actually offered? Who are you actually taking this information from? But we're going to use it just to build into the conclusion that Putin apparently, allegedly, has offered to halt his invasion of Ukraine at the current front line as part of efforts to reach a peace deal with US President Trump, according to people familiar with the matter. Then what we are seeing is Putin is playing along. He's playing along here, showing that he's willing to negotiate and that it's not Russia who's holding up peace, it's Ukraine. Ukraine is doing the same as well. This is all political theatre happening to try and bring the US onto their side. The Russian president has told Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, during a meeting in St. Petersburg earlier this month that Moscow could relinquish its claims to areas of four partly occupied Ukrainian regions that remain under Kyiv's control. Three of the people have said. So again, we're not still 100% if this has actually been floated. Now, the US floated ideas for a possible settlement that includes Washington's recognising Russian ownership of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. We know Ukraine and Europe is never going to agree to that, as well as at least acknowledging the Kremlin's de facto control over parts of the four regions it currently holds. Now, European officials briefed from the US reports to end the war cautioned that Putin would probably use the apparent concessions as bait to lure Trump into accepting Russia's other demands and forcing them on Ukraine as a fait accompli. So a done deal, leaving others with no other choice but to accept it. And this fait accompli, this is what I think a lot of the ceasefire is too, that once the guns have all silent, well, if anyone starts that back up again, you're just trying to push them into no other choice of this. And an official has said, there is a lot of pressure on Kyiv right now to give up on things so Trump can claim a victory. And we have seen that Trump, he does not have any appetite to continue this war. And that's why I said that patience plays in, well, his impatience plays into Putin's strategic patience because, well, we'll just continue wheeling this along and eventually Trump may just withdraw support. Continue on the article. The US proposals include deploying a European peacekeeping contingent in Ukraine as well as a separate non-NATO military force to help monitor a ceasefire along a demilitarized zone spanning the entirety of more than 1,000 kilometers. Again, you're still dealing with both countries have to accept this. Of course, Ukraine's going to be okay with this, but Russia does not want a de facto force there. And what other militaries are large enough to actually enforce this who have less involvement in this? So you need to exclude all of the NATO militaries or all of the Five Eyes militaries. They're too involved to be an unbiased peacekeeper in this and actually monitor the armistice on both sides. You're probably looking at India. I don't think they'd have any real want to do it. And then you may look at China, and I think that is very, very dangerous, potentially more dangerous of that arm of control into those regions than actually just drawing a line somewhere. And when we're talking, over a century. But under the potential deal, Ukraine would pledge not to retake Russian-occupied territory by force, while Russia would agree to halt its army's slow advance. Now, we don't know how this is going to look. I think one of the things we could look at is those territories then having a UN-monitored vote for becoming an independent area, becoming the autonomous republic. We do know that can occur, but there's a bit of grey zone under the UN Charter of that of, well, whose borders do you actually sit in if you are autonomous? So it's very difficult. And I believe in the future we will look back and go, holy shit, this went on years more than it should have gone. And it already has. So what we know is in attritional protracted warfare, the higher the cost of war, whether it's in lives, resources, political capital, the less willing countries will be to make concessions. We talked about this in planning for protraction. Now, every sacrifice in all these sectors, it deepens the country's commitment to victory and it makes any compromise feel like defeat. So the longer it goes on, the less likely you are to make compromise. And leaders, they fear domestic backlash of conceding after heavy losses, and publics grow less tolerant to anything short of a clear win. And this domestic backlash is, what does it look like to Zelensky if he signs away territories? What does it look like to Putin if he doesn't take the territories which are already annexed under Russian law? What happens then? In this way, escalating costs can harden positions and prolong conflict, even when a negotiated peace might be more rational. So what we will look back on in the future in a decade and goes, look, a negotiated peace at this point, or 12 months ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, would have been more rational. But now that the cost of war has climbed so high, and this war has become existential for both the state of Ukraine and Russia, well, it's going to be very, very hard to turn anyone's opinion on this, or anyone's position, I should say, more on that. And that's why a continuation of war seems very likely. Now, the biggest risk in these negotiations collapsing, and this is exactly what I believe Putin wants, is the US, Trump, losing patience and walking away from Ukraine, going, look, and we know in Trump's art of the deal that you have to be prepared to walk away from it. And I think that is becoming more and more likely. Now, could there be a 180 shift where then Trump gives heaps of weapons and arms to Ukraine? I guess theoretically. I don't think Trump's supporters and his other administration would be behind that at all. But I think most likely is that this prolong, and this is what Putin and his guys are buying into, is we prolong this and Trump will eventually withdraw support. And what they are looking at is that the front lines are already shifting in Russia's favour with the American support. What happens if the support then disappears? Now, there's a secondary win here, secondary victory that could occur, and we know that Rand in 2019 spoke about this, and the potential of extending Russia in this war is that rifts in NATO start to appear, and what started as a crack is now a crevasse in NATO. And if America then walk away and the NATO European countries want to continue, it will absolutely weaken the alliance from within and weaken the security guarantees between nations. So that is a secondary win there, is not only then the largest supporter and the most powerful military on the world is going to be withdrawing support, but then there's going to be a huge rift within NATO as well. Now, I guess to conclude here, Ukraine and Russia, they might just keep going, fighting until one side is completely exhausted, whether it is their militaries, their economies, or just the public will to continue the war. Neither wants to be the first to back down, and both still believe that the war will tilt at some point in their favour. You know me, I think event horizons in this war have been crossed, but that doesn't mean that huge costs won't be inflicted on the other side. And in years to come, like many protracted attritional wars, people will look back and ask, what was this really for? Because Pyrrhic victories, survival of the states, and complete exhaustion, they're not mutually exclusive at all. And decisions made now may be felt decades down the track of, well, actually, for the survival of X, we should have done Y. No one has a crystal ball at how this war is going to go. But attritional war like this in countries with declining demographics that are pouring in massive amounts of hardware and human capital, well, we know how that goes. We know that that cost is going to increase and potentially in attritional war then fall off a cliff at some point, and like the bankruptcy theory, little by little, and then all at once, and then any bargaining chip position may actually be off the table. So we will see. There's a lot in that we could go over, but my head is killing me and I need to have a lie down. Legends, you have a fantastic day, and hopefully I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.